Today I also wanted to share a bit about one-to-one learning and just talk about the concept, this important concept that we're moving into for the next few weeks. So, of course, one-to-one learning means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And number one, we can look at the types of devices that could be used for one-to-one learning. And yes, it could even be used with smartphones, right? You have smartphones that students might use. And that could be one-to-one as long as each student, again, has a smartphone. So one-to-one, really the key is that every student has the device. And yeah, that's the idea. And they're using the devices for some type of teaching and or learning. And so you've got each student has a device and they're learning with them. So you could have tablet computers, and examples of that, of course, are the iPad, the Samsung Galaxy notebooks that they sell, and various other Android devices that are out there. And then you've got laptop computers, and there are various different types of those as well. You've got your full-fledged computer devices like the iMac, or sorry, MacBook. That would be iMac would be a desktop. MacBook, you've got Windows laptops of all different types and shapes. You have Chromebooks that would be considered laptop computers. And then you've got desktop computers as well, and those are the non-portable computers that are the type that are generally in computer labs and so forth. So one-to-one learning could happen in any of these types of situations. And in fact, sometimes it's a bring your own device type of situation. So various different students might have various different devices. You might not all have iPads, for instance. Maybe some students have an iPad and other students have laptops. And so, of course, a one-to-one initiative or activity would have to account for that, the differences among students. But in most schools, you can find either one-to-one classrooms already, with every student having a Chromebook ready to work with it, or an iPad, or you can find often a cart that can be checked out to be used, or a computer lab that you can schedule time in and go to. So those are some different, I guess, configurations of one-to-one types of devices and systems in the classroom. But yeah, for one-to-one learning to happen, each student has a device, and there could be teacher-centered activities that go along with this. And teacher-centered doesn't just mean that the teacher is presenting to students and sharing content with students. It could also mean that students are learning from an app that is teaching them. So in other words, there could be a great app. An example of this would be the Khan Academy app, where there's a lot of different lessons on there, but it is teacher-centered in that students are learning and watching and maybe doing a little participating, but it's not students creating something. And so teacher-centered, it's teaching to the student rather than, and the student is listening and learning. But it could be teacher-centered also in the other way, like I shared with Nearpod, which is one of the apps you might want to choose, depends on how you'd like to do things, where the teacher is sharing a presentation with students, and that presentation is showing up on every student device as well. So those are some teacher-centered ways of thinking about one-to-one learning, but there are also student-centered ways of thinking about one-to-one learning, and that means that the student is using the one-to-one devices maybe to create something or to share their knowledge in some way. They could be creating, for instance, a small presentation on animals that they are learning about. Or maybe they're creating a storybook on the latest concept that you're teaching them in the class. That would be more student-centered. So again, teacher-centered, the student is listening, watching, learning from the device or the teacher, using the devices. And student-centered, that means that the student is creating or using the device to build or to make or to show something that they created. And that's a part of the learning process as well. Either one is okay for the assignment that we have. So, it could work either way in your classroom, but it has to be one-to-one, and there has to be some learning going on with each device. And one type of one-to-one device is the tablet computer, and this is an iPad is an example of this, or other tablets that may be out there, such as Samsung Galaxy notebooks as well, and other things that are available. They have always-on operations. In other words, you don't have to turn it on, log it on, that kind of a thing. You can just turn it on and it should be almost always on, and it comes up very quickly, so there's no wait time for it to boot up or anything like that. And then the idea of sit back instead of sit up. Often with tablet computers you can sit back and read it. You can flatten it's flat, you know, you don't have an extra keyboard where you've got to hold it rigid or straight up or anything like that. And it's small enough and mobile enough to take with you everywhere and has a natural touch interface. And so this link here is to an interesting video about the inventor of the mouse who passed away years ago. And you know, the mouse is maybe even passing away, so to speak, in a lot of ways as an interface or a way to interact, because we have touch screens now. And this adds a lot for especially younger students. It's a more natural way of interacting with a computer than maybe with a mouse and keyboard. And so iPads have very much been adopted for younger groups of students. And there's a few studies that have been done about these, of course. Children have quickly developed ease with a stylus for drawing in one study, and they had technical issues for sure. But it's interesting that students or children were interested and persisted without frustration. In other words, if there were technical issues, if there are technical issues, it's likely to be the case for you as well, that students will be willing to persist through it because of the novelty idea, you know, and the interest in using the device without too much frustration. And it says, what seems to matter for the children's learning is the ways that teachers choose to implement this technology. And that's what we're talking about this week, is implementing the technology in an effective way that supports learning. And this is from a study that, again, the study that Dr. Moonwold and I did, where we found that students really did enhance their reading comprehension by having to do student-centered learning activities that created basically a comprehension activity of what they had read for the week. So they had to create something that showed us that they knew what they had read for the week. And whether that was a map, a concept map, maybe a puppet show through an app called Puppet Pals, or an EduCreations presentation. They created these things to show us what they had read. And they kind of had to go back through their book and find out exactly what it was that they wanted to talk about, and then present it to us in those different ways. And based on the survey results that we had, they enhanced their enjoyment of reading, is what they shared, the students shared. And also what we found was that there was, again, enhanced reading comprehension levels among these students according to their weekly test results that they had during that time of the study. One thing, though, to be aware of with this study, and you'll read it, it's part of the reading for this week, is that tutoring effects were there as well. We had several northern state students come in to do the study with us and help us with it. And that meant bringing in a lot more teachers into the classroom. So it could have been that affected really their reading comprehension rather than just the iPad and the apps that we had them do itself. So that's something to be aware of with that as well. Now, any discussion of apps on the iPad and what apps to use for a one-to-one learning situation is always a failure, because we can never really, there's no way to list all of the apps that could be useful for learning in a one-to-one situation with iPads, for instance. But there's some interesting ones that I just list here for your reference. We have used EduCreations, Comic Maker for Android devices, but there's Comics Head for non-Android devices for Apple. And we've used those a bunch of times with pretty good results. Students can create things to show what they have been learning. So your one-to-one learning situation can be you presenting to students, but it can also be student-centered, and you could choose an app like Comics Head or EduCreations and invite your students to create something that shares their knowledge, and that could be your one-to-one experience as well. But these are just a small list of apps that I've found to be useful on the iPad for different subject areas, not for every subject area, but for different ones. And then as I look in this list, that list that I shared of software from teachers, these kind of come up a lot. Microsoft Office projects are nice for students to be able to create a presentation using PowerPoint, for instance, or a paper with a Word or something like that. Maybe there's something, or with Excel they can create a graph for a one-to-one experience. On iMovie they can create videos about any topic, and iMovie is a great product, especially on the iPad. It makes it more simple, I think, for younger students. Movie Maker is a free one for Windows, and Adobe products is what was listed as well. Now, most of you probably don't have access to Adobe products though, but those were listed in the survey. And then there are websites, right? A whole bunch of websites that you could maybe even use for part of your project or for part of your idea for one-to-one. Maybe students are creating a Prezi or a Story Jumper or a Storybird presentation using those websites, or Google Classroom. Maybe that's going to become part of your project. So there's a bunch of different tools out there, and really, telling you which one to use would probably not be right for me because, again, your situation is going to be different for everybody. But what I want you to do is to think about this now, because the project's due next week, and to whatever one you choose, you're going to have to get into depth with and try to figure it out. And try to learn as much as you can about how it would work in a one-to-one situation in your classroom, and then try to get it set up to make it work. And that's a challenge. I know it's a challenge, and that's why I'm kind of challenging you right now to kind of step up and see what you can figure out and make work. Now, if it turns out that this assignment, for whatever reason, you're not able to work it out, if you're not a classroom teacher, for instance, and you need some other accommodations with this assignment, I can provide an alternative to that as well. So just send me an email and let me know if it's not feasible for the timeline that we have, because this is, again, the first time we're doing this all online. So I wanted to get that feedback from you as well. But get ready and get working on this one-to-one learning experience. And good luck this week.